AudioJungle.
Alessandra was bored out of her skull. Routine dictated that by 4 hours into her workday, the internet would cease to amuse her, and she would take to spinning her chair until she grew too dizzy to continue. Today was no exception. As usual during bouts of chair spinning, she contemplated the futility of her job. Her little security station had a lovely view of asteroid field G3034 and the endless black beyond. It was a perfect vantage point for taking in the vast emptiness of space. Otherwise, it was entirely useless. Al would never understand why anyone had thought a potting asteroid mining facility on the outermost edge of the Milky Way needed protection, let alone a manned security station. As her chair's revolution wound down, she placed a hand on the dashboard. But before she could push off again, a scanner started to beep. She scooted closer. FTL signature detected, its screen read. Odd, she thought. A supply delivery was due today, but shipments were never on time. Even people paid to come here did so only grudgingly. A flicker of motion caught her eye. Al glanced up. On the screen that showed her surroundings, the blackness began to ripple as something tugged at the fabric of space. She sucked in a sharp breath. By the size of the distortion, the ship was massive. The fabric of space ripped, and the ship slid out of hyperspace as if from behind a curtain of night. It was no supply ship. It wasn't merely massive, she realized as more of it appeared, it was a world in its own right. Even from hundreds of kilometers away, it dominated her view. The hull was painted in a dozen colors, each slowly fading into the next, until you couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. Its design was strange to her, boxy where any respectable ship was sleek. Black letters ran vertically down its middle in no language she knew. Al, who had grown up on a planet that was a trade hub for hundreds of species, had never seen anything like it. She looked back down at her dashboard. The ship gave off none of the usual signatures that would identify it as friend or foe. Al jumped as an image flashed onto her screen. It was Varda, the head miner. What in the name of Sylphidon is that? He wailed, tail lashing in agitation. Belatedly, Al remembered it was her job to do something about the ship. That's a really great question. Let me hail them. She stabbed a button and activated a communicator. Come no farther, she barked into it, though the ship was hanging placidly in space. We have guns trained on you. Identify yourself or risk being fired upon. Silence. When it became apparent there would be no response, Varda said, shoot it, Al. Shoot the thrice damned thing. Are you insane? She said. We couldn't scare off a pirate ship, let alone that shit. I could slam the whole station into it and it wouldn't even notice. Shooting at it would just piss it off. Well, you have to do something, he said, claws digging into his own skin. Your security. He was right, she knew. They could call for backup, but the nearest outpost was days away. They could try to run, but the ship could vaporize them before they left real space. She was their best shot at not dying. Fuck. Al buried her face in her hands. She had taken this job in shitfuck nowhere knowing she would hate it, but she'd needed the money too badly to turn it down. Now living on the street seemed a pleasant alternative. Fucking fine. Send a message to Outpost Bergerson 12, let them know what's happening. I'll take a pot out. She sat up and ended the call before Varda could reply. Al sat staring at her screen for a moment, watching the strange hull shimmer in the distance. Maybe it was a new species making first contact, she told herself. But there were no habitable planets within hundreds of light years, and new species didn't build ships like that. She retrieved her personal gun. It wouldn't do her a damn bit of good, but she drew strength from the feeling of its weight on her ship. She made her way to the pod bay. The pods were tiny, lightly armored things with pop guns for protection, meant to ferry people from ship to ship. As she clambered into one, Al was acutely aware of just how little use their walls would be against the guns of that monster ship. The bay door opened, and she slid out into the void of space. Her pulse pounded in her throat. The ship loomed larger with every passing kilometer as she sped toward it. Hello. She called into the communicator every now and again, hoping it was distance that interfered with their communications. Ominous silence greeted her. As she grew closer and none of the ship's visible guns turned on her, she allowed herself some hope. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Still, her hands shook on the controls. The breath went out of her when a huge door slid open in the side of the strange ship. She hadn't even seen a groove to mark its existence. She steered toward it. The maw closed around her. Below her a base stretched out, filled with glittering squarish ships as alien to Al as their mother. 1,000 shapes and sizes and designs, but she could not name one of them. She sank down into a docking station thrice the size of her pod. It settled with a clang, not fitting quite right, but stayed upright. Whatever atmosphere the bay had been vented when the door opened. Al pulled on the emergency life support suit, trembling fingers fumbling with every strap. She patted her gun to reassure herself. Then she stepped out of her pod. Her shoes thudded against the metal of the docking station, but made no sound in the vacuum. The deep silence was unnerving. To her great relief, the nearest door was not invisible like the one on the outside of the ship. There was a panel of buttons next to it, but she had no idea what any of them did, and she was under no illusion that she wasn't being watched. She had only to stand in front of the door for a few seconds before it slid open. Al stepped into a corridor with another door at the end. Only when the one behind her shut did the one before her open. Warm orange light spilled in. Her life support suit was so soaked with sweat that she made a small wet sound when she clenched her gloved fists. They wouldn't let you come so far just to kill you, she told herself, and walked into the light. The first thing Al noticed was the roar. Any spaceship that was big enough and peopled enough had it. The rumble of people talking, machines grinding, engines thrumming, all reflected back on itself over and over as it echoed against the bulkheads. Spend enough time on a ship and you stop noticing it, the same way you didn't notice the atmosphere of your home planet. But it was always jarring to newcomers. It's a city ship, Al thought as her gaze swept over a deck whose far wall was too distant to see. Then someone stepped in front of her and her brain short-circuited. It was a human woman. Her clothes were odd, but otherwise Al might have passed her 1,000 times on the street without noticing. Her hair was black, her eyes brown, her skin tan. Middle-aged, average height, average weight. Nothing about her was remarkable, and yet here she was, on the most remarkable ship Al had ever seen. "Hello," the woman said in accented galactic standard. "My name is Narahai." Her smile was welcoming. "Why?" Al blurted. The woman's smile shrank, and she realized she had spoken in English. She repeated herself in galactic standard. "Because my parents named me so," said the woman. "Is that not the way of it on Earth?" Al shook her head. "No. I mean, it is no. Why are you here? A human. I was born on this ship, as were many generations before me." She gestured. "You may remove your suit. The air here is entirely breathable for humans." Of course, the woman wasn't wearing any kind of protection. Al's thoughts felt sluggish. She took off her helmet and breathed in, to no ill effect. "My name is Alessandra," Al said at last, realizing the woman had meant to make introductions. At the same time, it occurred to her that the woman's Narahai's galactic wasn't just accented. It was archaic. Being a constructed language used mostly for diplomatic purposes, it evolved only slowly, but some of her words were outdated. "It is a great pleasure to welcome you aboard the bridge, Alessandra," said Narahai. "Thank you." Al tried. It wasn't the right thing to say, but what was the right thing to say in this situation? "It's a lovely ship, but perhaps you could have, let us know you were coming. We aren't used to visitors around here." Narahai's brows drew together. "But we did announce her coming," she protested. "Many years ago." Sudden understanding lit her face. "Is that why you did not respond when we hailed you?" "What? You didn't hail us?" "We did," Narahai said. "It seems there is some trouble with our communication systems. Perhaps they are incompatible. After so many years apart, I suppose it is to be expected." After so many, Al had thought she'd gotten a foothold in the conversation, but now she was more lost than ever. "What are you talking about?" Narahai studied her closely. Whatever she saw made her eyes widen. "You don't know," she said wonderingly. "None of you know." "No, so tell me." Al felt a headache coming on. Fear had left her exhausted and irritable. Narahai was silent for a long moment. At last she began. "The other races long disdained humans. Greedy, they called us. Insatiable. So the old texts say, at any rate, I cannot be certain. If what I know of our history is true, I cannot blame them. We were born on a garden world, and yet we wanted more. We looked to the sky and wanted to make it ours before we knew such a thing was possible. Our greed drove us to do great things. We achieved spaceflight when we were barely out of our industrial age. Yet it nearly killed us too. We almost sucked our resources dry. Had we not invented hyperdrive, we may have perished. When we discovered faster than light travel, the galaxy was open to us in a way it had never been before. We met every sapient species known to the galaxy. We settled on every known habitable planet. We terraformed every known uninhabitable planet. Some thought it would be enough for us, but there is no changing our fundamental nature. We can never be satisfied only with what is known. So we set out into the unknown. We sent probes to every far corner of the galaxy. We contacted hundreds of new races. We mapped every inch of the galaxy, and in so doing, we conquered it. Everything within our grasp was ours. Narahai paused a moment and smiled, almost wistfully. But we are humans, and our reach has ever exceeded our grasp. It is not in us to be satisfied. We look on impossibilities as challenges. She looked at Al as if willing her to understand something. A suspicion was growing in Al, but she could not wrap her mind around it. Surely not. Surely not even her own species, insane and insatiable as they were, would attempt such a thing. But she was a human, and so she hoped they had. She hoped they had succeeded, as absurd as it was. And wasn't that reason enough to believe Narahai? That she would even consider such a thing? The galaxy was ours, Narahai said. But we looked at it and said, only the one galaxy. It was folly. It was madness. No sane species would attempt it. But we are no sane species. And so, 641 years ago, we built a ship. Al looked at the ship around her with new eyes. Narahai noticed. Not this one, I fear. The first one, the Dawn, has long since been scrapped for parts. But it reached its destination. It took hundreds of years in hyperspace. Generations were born and lived and died without ever leaving these walls. But it reached its destination, she repeated softly. And we found what we were looking for. Al's heart thundered in her ears. Heat and cold chased each other down her spine. Tears sprang to her eyes. So, said Narahai, extending a hand, eyes twinkling, would you like to meet the Andromedans? This content is Creative Commons. Relevant attribution can be found in the description. Thanks for watching.